here on our network, we're going to go through a number of things with a good friend of mine. I love Doug. He's an amazing Colonel Doug Macgregor, the hero of the Battle of 73 Easting. He's written several books, Breaking the Phalanx, which actually changed doctrine in DOD. I don't know how you feel about it, Doug, but they credit you for helping shape the Iraq invasion by your thinking in that book and the idea of modularization of the military, which I thought was a great idea. And obviously you have a new book out, Margin of Victory, 5 Battles That Changed the Face of Modern War. We'll talk a little bit about that. Well, anyways, thank you for being here, Doug.
Sure. If I may, I would revise the introduction in one way.
Sure.
Sam, the hero of the 73 Easting, there were 1,100 of us in the 2nd Squadron on the battlefield that day, and I would say there were certainly 1,100 heroes.
Yes, sir.
No mean the only one or alone. It's important to keep that in mind.
Yes, sir. Oh, no, I agree. And I would encourage people to go out and check. I think the History Channel is a great, very accurate rendition of what happened. And,
well, I also wrote a book about it. It's called Warrior's Rage.
Warrior's Rage.
Right. And that was published, I think 2009 or 2010, somewhere there. And, people might find it of interest. And a number of, movie producers have expressed an interest in it, but I think it's a tough nut to crack right now. Yeah. And I think at some point it will be very interesting to people because it's a positive story about the U.S. military. And I think we could use those.
Right. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if you know, Doug, I produced something called Chain of Command, which was done by Nat Geo, that basically my old friend Joe Dunford, General Joe Dunford, wanted us to actually show what the Pentagon was doing well during his time as chairman, which is out. And now we've been told we can maybe do a season 2 of that, which we're working on right now. So I'll keep you informed on that. So let me start our interview with a quote. Jonathan Parshall said in his keynote speech titled 1942, The Crux of War. This is what he said. Far fewer wars than one might think have outcomes that are actually preordained. Wars are conditional. Their outcome depends on a chain of events, each affected by ones coming before it and likewise those coming after it. So, Doug, is the outcome of the Ukraine conflict preordained?
Well, gosh, I think that historian's quote probably fits most descriptions of dating. When I wrote Margin of Victory, and I picked 5 battles, I did it with something else in mind.
Yeah.
I was trying to demonstrate a couple of very important things that Americans absolutely do not understand. In fact, they're not alone, but I think it's a huge problem in the United States. One was most battles, and for that matter, wars, are won certainly at least 10 to 20 years before they occur.
Right.
And that's a function of decisions that are made on organization, leadership, training, education, as well as technology, and how well you organize to exploit technology, which is something the U.S. Army does very poorly. The naval and air forces understand that everything for success in their worlds depends upon organizing to exploit technology.
Right.
We have lots of stupid people who say, well, we equip men. We don't turn it around and say we're manning the equipment. Well, they're wrong. The truth is, if you're successful, it's because you've manned it effectively. Right. You've altered your organization for combat in order to exploit technology that's new and different from what you had before.
Right.
The second part of this was what has profoundly changed, and the revolution that I was trying to get people to understand is really this revolution of indirect fire, or what you would call standoff attack, long-range strike. There are all sorts of names you can use for it. And how the emergence of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platforms, literally from seabed to space, linked to a whole range of long-range strike systems. And long-range, frankly, to me, as a soldier, means almost anything beyond my line of sight. Mm-hmm. All of that results in a profound way that changes the way you fight and organize to fight. And we really haven't come to terms with that. We still think in terms of long-range strike that comes from the Air Force or the Navy, as augmenting our artillery. We don't see ourselves as part of this new paradigm. And that's playing out right now in Ukraine. One of the things that the Russians have done very effectively, and it's not surprising since they were the first after World War II to really see this, is that they have organized their ISR and tightly linked it to a whole range of strike systems from automatic mortars all the way up to tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and so forth, to the point where early in the campaign there was a fight in and around Kharkov, and an apartment block was abandoned, and the Ukrainians went across the street into a mall and set up essentially artillery and fighting positions. When the word reached the Russians within 7 minutes launched a cruise missile from the Black Sea that targeted and destroyed that mall area with all of the Ukrainians in it. That all took 7 minutes. That's impossible in the U.S. military. And that leads you to a whole other discussion about unity of command.
Right.
Someone at every level, one person, one man is in command. We don't do that. We have multiple single service headquarters augmented to quote unquote cooperate and be joint. And they all fight over turf, access, their role, leadership, and so forth. So Russia how to do that infinitely better than we did.
So that's the thing. Look, I've come through the system. I enlisted in 81, was commissioned in 83. I can honestly say that other than going to spy school, going down to Camp Perry to become a spy, none of the education, professional education, ever related directly to what I had to do to be effective in combat. From going through officer basic. No, Doug, I'm completely serious. I mean,
look, I am not surprised. I agree with you. And one of the things that did not endear me to my superiors was that both during Desert Storm and afterwards when I commanded at Fort Riley, the paradigm I adopted was tactical paradigm, battle drills, formations, and so forth, and integration with air power was really very German. Mm-hmm. And to a lesser extent, somewhat influenced at the time by Soviet practices. But I effectively abandoned whatever the U.S. Army was preaching, which was never quite clear to me. And as a result, we were successful in the desert in 91. And then the squadron I commanded set a record at the National Training Center, which once again did not endear me to anybody. We were the high performance unit in history. But it was because I simply did not do what the U.S. Army suggested because I never saw that it made any sense. So I agree with you completely.
Yeah, no, and you're credited widely for all of the doctrine and tactics you were able to come up with. But I did the same thing because when I went through officer basic as a second lieutenant, they made us jack of all trades, second lieutenants. We're supposed to know everything in MI. It's like that's stupid. And next thing I know, I'm doing chasing terrorists in Europe, doing things I was never trained to do. It's like you just got to go do it. You got to figure it out. And then same thing in Afghanistan. My book Operation Dark Heart, which I've talked to you about a little bit before. Doug, I was literally going to Command and General Staff College, literally the month before I deployed, learning air-land battle, knowing full well I wasn't going to do a thing regarding the FLOT or FIBA in Afghanistan. Yet I was required to know that to a great level of certainty because reasons, I guess. But it added absolutely nothing to my capacity to be effective in combat in that current war. And that's what it's like. Now we would probably be well served to go look at the FLOT and FIBA issues if we're actually going to be facing a near-peer adversary, which now we're not. So it's just
the problem is, of course, that air-land battle was really obsolete when it was adopted.
Right.
It was essentially an attempt to replicate what the Germans did in the 1940s. There was some language from Soviet doctrine incorporated into the thing, deep battle, this sort of business. But it really wasn't what we needed at the time, but it was such a breath of fresh air compared with the nonsense that already existed that everybody celebrated it.
Right.
We need a fundamental reexamination of everything, not just in light of what we've seen happen in Ukraine, but you can speak also to this very well. You had access to overhead surveillance and a lot of information that frankly should be available today in most tactical formations.
Right.
There's a way to do that, but we haven't really done it.
Right.
And and one of the things that, well, you're saying that we should be like special operations. Well, in some ways, yes. And that was the point I made in Breaking the Phalanx,
right,
because I thought they were headed down the right road. But, the sad part is nothing is going to change in the near term. But perhaps this experience in Ukraine will help us a little bit, because clearly things there are very different. You have a battlefield right now where the Russians sitting in southern Ukraine, and keep in mind they are inching incrementally forward every day. So if you look at the line of contact, 160 miles long, it continues to move north and west, albeit slowly, because they're operating in this tremendous sea of mud,
right,
which limits your mobility. But you have a situation right now, and I watched this the other day on a video. It was sent to me from Ukraine, and it showed a Ukrainian brigade dismounting to walk across a field, because if you stay on the roads, obviously they're identified. If you're on the road, you're going to be destroyed instantly. But the Russians, of course, found them. This is roughly about 6 to 10 miles in front of their defensive positions, or at least their perimeter. They identified where they were, and within 2 minutes, they were under effective strike from a variety of systems.
Right.
Again, rocket artillery, tube artillery, and so forth. The entire brigade was annihilated in a space of about 60 seconds. This is a different world from the one you and I entered in the Army.
Oh, I get it.
When you entered the Army and the things that you were taught and the experience that you had, what I had in 91, I mean, I drove through artillery and had artillery shot at me, but what we're talking about is beyond that in a magnitude that most Americans cannot conceive of, so that you can completely obliterate something, and you can do it because you are protected by layered air defenses. And that's what we don't have. We have no means of protecting ourselves from air and missile attack on the scale of the Russians.
Right. And I want to go through and kind of get to that and the nuclear issue as well. So to that point, and to your point, every major success we've had in combat came from a great deal of preparation, which I would argue with you, we're not there right now. Plan Orange. Back years ago, Tony Kukolo, Commandant of the War College, Tony and I sat down and how do we do what you're talking about? How do we try to figure things out ahead of time? And he wanted us to work on a Plan Orange of the 21st century. Doug, I went to Dunford, to Joe Dunford with this. Joe may not be happy with me talking about this, but me and my merry little team of rebels, to include Jim Woolsey and Bud McFarland and Dick Newton, Ambassador Hank Cooper, we all sat down and said, we need a grand strategy. And you know who vetoed that, Doug? You want to guess who vetoed the grand strategy?
No, I can think of
named Mattis, James Mattis, said it was too hard to do. I'm not joking. It was too hard to do. It's like, what? We have this huge, most expensive military ever on the face of the earth, just kind of meandering around looking for things to do without a strategy. And so to me, am I missing? I mean, I know I'm only Lieutenant Colonel here, Doug, but am I missing something? To me, the strategy should be there. That's what we build from to build success. So, I mean.
Well, truthfully, I would argue we've never done it. And if you go back to the Second World War, our performance in that war was not some brilliant achievement.
No, I agree.
And I don't blame people like Marshall for that, because he inherited something. He did the best he could. If you go all the way back to MacArthur as Chief of Staff of the Army, he tried to establish a system where he could identify talented officers. He created examinations, study programs,